Hey there, Chief Meteorologist Hank Allen here with the latest edition of Tracking the Tropics. I believe we'll have Natalie Parsons joining us here in a little bit as well. She makes her way back from the LASPCA today. Another neighborly Natalie on the way for you. But in the meantime, we'll go by and talk about what is happening in the tropics, which luckily is not much over the short term here. After the effects of Arthur, of course, this past week, certainly a much different feel today than it was a week ago when we were trying to get you prepared for some of those impacts of Arthur coming in. And a couple of notes to me here. First off, they actually added one more tornado, and National Weather Service confirmed an 11th tornado up in Lacombe. So 11 tornadoes from Arthur. Now, the one in Arabi on Friday night that sort of dipped down very quickly, result is a couple of those outflow boundaries and storms coming together. That's a little bit of a stretch to me to include that as an Arthur tornado. Obviously, the storm had long dissipated and that part of the system was well gone at that point, but that's where we're at. So if you ever look it up in the future, it's going to say 11. Also, a perfect example of what we talk about with these tropical systems in the sense that, we were highlighting pockets of heavy rain, mainly in the Florida parishes and southern Mississippi. Well, that happened in southern Mississippi, certainly, where we ended up with 12 to 15 inches of rain, maybe even more in some spots. But of course, you had that line that came down farther to the southwest, that band that's set up basically from Homa up to Slidell, that corridor of those tornadoes and heavy rain. And so a lot of the Florida parishes actually missed out on some of those widespread projections. So that is always the takeaway for me on tropical systems. Obviously, we are trying to forecast those heavy rain areas as best as possible. I find a lot of times they don't always line up where the modeling has it. Now, if it's or at least in these disorganized systems, obviously in an organized system, you got the band swirling around, especially if it's something that's just sitting there over you, there's going to be a lot of rain. But in these disorganized systems like this, tough to predict where the exact band's set up. And so my other takeaway there was, it's not always a guarantee that you're going to get that heavy rain where it looks like you're going to. I also still have a hard time even saying most of that activity was associated with Arthur, just because it was such a disorganized system. The low was so ridiculous. It was over in Texas. It had dissipated before that area of storms even got to us. And of course, that area of storms was way far off to the east. It was coming up through the Gulf. We had been watching it for a day or so. And it was almost more convective in nature in terms of the way those tornadoes were behaving and looking on radar and that sort of thing. So, obviously associated with the tropical flow and all that, but it's not like the system moved right overhead and we saw all that. So it was a wild setup, that's for sure. And luckily, everything is calm at the moment here. Taking a look at the visible satellite, I'd like to start off on that so you can see what's going on across the Gulf. And obviously, it is very clear all across the central Gulf. You've got big time high pressure, which is setting up over the central Gulf at this point. So if you've been with us for the past couple of weeks, I've been talking about how I think we're primed for an early season system, June or July. Well, now we've had that. And so I look for things to slow down a little bit here over the next month or so, but maybe not altogether. I still think that the better chances of a storm locally will be earlier in the season here before we really start to kick in this El Nino and all that sort of thing to give us a slower season. So, you can argue whether or not Arthur should have been classified as a tropical storm or not, but at the very least, I think, the Hurricane Center maybe gets that first one out of the way because we may end up with a very slow season overall. We'll just have to see how that goes, of course, over the next few months. But in the meantime, pretty quiet over the Gulf. As we said, big ridge of high pressure. You can see a couple of waves trying to make their way into central Mexico here. Here's another one near the Yucatan. Certainly nothing of consequence. That big area of sinking air, of course, that high pressure just sitting over the Gulf. So we're looking at, for the most part, very quiet conditions here over the central parts of the Gulf. And really, look at this, out into the Atlantic. Now, again, not necessarily the time of year where we see a lot of development out here, obviously, but still early in the season. But there's certainly nothing going on. Now, as you look at sort of coastal Venezuela here, you got a little wave moving west, but that's not going to be developing into anything. Maybe another one trying to get going way out there. But again, nothing of consequence at this point. So very quiet all across the Gulf, the Caribbean, and the Atlantic Basin. Just sort of a broad upper low spinning around here out in the middle of the ocean there. So again, that's not going to cause any problems for anybody either. But we like to see quiet conditions, and indeed that's what we're getting. So I'm going to blend in a little sort of local forecasting here as well. in this show, just to sort of keep you up to date on what's going on locally here as we continue to try to clean up from Arthur. A lot of those flood levels are coming down. We do still have a couple of flood warnings left, like on the Pearl River there. But as I mentioned, that ridge of high pressure in place across the northern Gulf. And so this is a classic summertime setup for us, and frankly for the country. When you get these big ridges of high pressure, you get those storm clusters that go around the edge of those. And we talk about this all the time. One of the terms you'll hear is ring of fire, because it tends to be very active on the outskirts, sort of the periphery of that ridge, that flow, that clockwise flow around those, or maybe the term ridge riders. We get these little clusters, these pieces of energy that pop up and ride through that flow as well. And so that's what you have right now up in Oklahoma. And you can see that flow around that ridge coming down to the southeast from there. So far these systems have stayed off to our east over there through southern Mississippi, southern Alabama. That one is starting a little bit farther to the west. And so this is something that I think we'll have to keep an eye on. And again, you talk about these coming around that flow, around that northwest flow. And so you can sort of draw this down to the southeast. And I think it runs right into our area as we head into tomorrow. So initially we were talking about, not much rain chance for the next few days. 10 o'clock show last night, I bumped that percentage up, and I think we'll have to keep it a little bit higher for tomorrow again. Now, no guarantee here that this holds together all the way through. This is going to be one of those scenarios to where if these storms peter out early enough, we may not see much from that, but those are looking pretty healthy right now, and I just think you've got a pretty good chance of that cluster holding together and moving down into our area. Some locally heavy rain potential, some gusty wind potential. So I point this out to say, if you are in the process of cleaning up, maybe you got the tarp on the roof, whatever the case, you're still dealing with a lot of debris around the area, trying to get over the flooding issues, that sort of thing. All this activity should move through relatively quickly. So I'm not talking about necessarily adding on to flood levels or additional flood concerns or anything like that. But I do think as this moves through, we could see some stronger wind gusts that could pick up maybe a tarp or something, or at least blow around some debris, something like that. So a heads up on that as you head into tomorrow, and especially into southern Mississippi here, sort of on the outskirts of that. So you can see what the forecast model shows here. There's that, look at that spin there, that clockwise flow in the Gulf. So there's that big ridge of high pressure. And here's what I'm talking about, is that cluster sort of comes down and rides around that. The potential for some of that to move into the area as you get into tomorrow afternoon and tomorrow evening as well. So that is, I think, the main rain chance over the next few days, and the main concern for, maybe not technically severe winds, but 40, 50, enough to blow stuff around, something like that. Keep talking about more on the tropics coming up in just a couple of minutes. Hope you stay with us. All right, welcome back to Tracking the Tropics. Chief Meteorologist Hank Allen here with you on this Tuesday afternoon, moving that futurecast ahead there to Thursday afternoon. I think that's probably a little overdone, but the same basic concept here, where you may be able to get some showers and storms to develop sort of on the eastern side of that ridge coming into the area. So again, just sort of a heads up there if you're in cleanup mode, you're dealing with some debris, some tarps on the roof, whatever the case. I wouldn't expect severe weather necessarily, but some potentially gusty winds, sort of borderline gusts around 40 miles per hour, something like that. The good news is, the other takeaway here on the forecast model is you see absolutely nothing going on in the Gulf. And that looks to be the case here. Over the next several days, we'll start to get back into a little bit more of an onshore flow as you get into Friday, which you couple that with the higher pressure aloft. Now we're not necessarily in that northwesterly flow, so this may give us a little bit better chance through the weekend of a daytime heating pop-up type scenario, but it's going to limit some of that storm cluster potential coming in from the northwest. And so once we get to the weekend, I really don't see a whole lot going on there. Here's the other factor in terms of tropical activity. The big dust layers are starting to make their way off of Africa and move across the Atlantic here, and you can see a big one coming up as we head into this weekend. This is going to be a huge patch of that dust through the Caribbean, so that's going to certainly keep things very quiet in that zone. And then as we move that ahead into Sunday and early next week, at least on this forecast model, it misses us, at least the core of it. But of course, you're talking about just that beautiful sunset and sunrise potential here when you get that dust layer up top. Gives you that glow in the sky here. And so if you have plans to be maybe farther out to the west, certainly towards Lake Charles or Houston, I think you'll really be by Monday sort of seeing the impacts of that. Some of it will be here, mind you, so don't be fooled. You combine that with you know, as we're talking about maybe low 90s again on Monday, probably some stagnant air, not, you know, sort of that summertime stagnation. You know, we could be talking about some poor air quality at that point. So be aware that you may have to, you know, prepare yourself if you've got some of those respiratory issues, if you're somebody that's impacted by that poor air quality. And that is certainly something we'll have to watch out for as we head into early next week, because it doesn't look like we're going to be seeing a lot of rain around the area to keep that air mass stirred up. But of course, the benefit here is when you get that huge patch there, that's some dry air in the western Gulf, and so you're not going to get much tropical development out of that. You notice we got another patch of some of that dust on the eastern side of the Atlantic here coming across as well. So once again, that's going to keep things pretty quiet. And just look at this as we head into the middle of next week. I mean, you have some significant layers here coming off of the coast of Africa, moving into the middle of next week. So that is really going to shut down any sort of tropical potential through that time frame across the Atlantic and into the Caribbean. And I think some of that will make its way towards us. So we're going to have to watch out for, again, some of those respiratory issues, give you some nice sunrise, sunset times, and that sort of thing. But we'll keep an eye on that, because there were times last year where we got some of those bigger patches, and I was getting some emails from people saying they were really having some breathing problems, messing with the respiratory system and that sort of thing. That could be a potential again as we head into next week, coupled just simply because you've got that coupled with the heat and sort of the stagnant air mass up top, which can give you poor air quality days anyway. And then you add that dust in, that could be a big factor. And you notice the difference between what we had this year and last year too. Not that we didn't have the dust layer at times last year, but we talked about this before, where last year we just had that very active wave scenario coming off of Africa. You had very active terrain, especially by the middle of the season, to where you just had these big waves coming off. Well, this year we're certainly starting off much drier. You don't necessarily have that setup coming off of Africa with those waves that, you know, a lot of times can turn into those more significant hurricanes, or at least tropical systems out in the middle of the Atlantic. So a little bit of a different setup here this time around this year, but we'll keep an eye on that. So we talked about this last week. We'll sort of review it, or 2 weeks ago anyway. We'll review it for you in terms of the tropical frequency of where we typically see these storms develop. Looks like Natalie has jumped in here. You're welcome to step in anytime. How are you? What you been doing? Handling dogs today?
Yes, I was shooting my Neighborly Natalie segment.
Okay, that's what I said off the top. Very good.
Brand new episode coming your way on Thursday at 4 p.m. And I'm absolutely bummed that I missed the Saharan Dust conversation, because I know our viewers love that. That's actually been a question for my What Up NOLA portion of the show.
Well, would you like to add anything to the dust?
People just love it.
Emailing it in, yeah.
Upper respiratory issues. I know that last year when it was really bad, I have asthma, I was feeling it, and I was kind of conversing with some of our viewers that kind of go dealing with stuff too. Yeah. But it definitely helps us to not see tropical activity.
It does, no question. And a lot of people always ask me, somebody was asking me at the pool last week actually about the dust and how, you know, does it help us in August? And it's like it would, but it never seems to be out there.
No, it's always around this time.
Yeah, it's always early in the season. Yeah, June and July is when that pops up.
Yeah.
And then by the time we really need it out there, it tends to dissipate. Yep. So we'll see if it happens this season, because again, we're starting off with quite a bit of it, and I don't think we're going to have as much moisture over Africa this year as we did last year, which you remember was one of the reasons the Hurricane Center was talking about an active season.
Yes.
Because of all those waves coming across, which typically does not concern us here because we usually don't get those systems. Yes. So kind of a reverse this year. And you can add another one to this, obviously, in terms of your June frequency here as you go through those average number of storms per 100 years. Obviously, we've seen Arthur so far this season. We can debate the merits on that low pressure system. Gosh. I don't know. It's, you know, two things can be true at the same time. Obviously, that was very significant weather over us, but the low pressure that was actually considered Arthur,
yeah,
it was just so ridiculous.
I was thinking about that because I know that in terms of the names, they only get removed if it's significant, and at the point that it reached our coast, it was a post-tropical cyclone.
Right.
So what we experienced was not a tropical storm, contrary to what other folks are saying. But it turns, did you touch on how that is possible? Because I know a lot of people were like, I thought it was going to be tropical, and then we have all these tornadoes. Yeah,
and that's where it gets confusing, because certainly you had the flow in the atmosphere around the system as a whole.
Yeah.
It was named Arthur at one point, so I guess technically in the grand scheme of things, even as you mentioned it goes post-tropical, it's still all considered to be associated with Arthur.
Arthur leftovers.
But yes, leftovers certainly. But yeah, by the time it got, I mean, it was even faded out from, I think, being even a depression by the time it got to the coast.
I remember I was looking at the models and it was like here, post-tropical cyclone. So
yeah, and it was wild because we had that batch over us that really was where the important stuff was, and then the leftover low was sort of lingering over there. So it'll be an interesting system. To your point, I don't think we see it retired. Simply because I don't think, there's certain criteria on the amount of damage in terms of monetary value, a loss of life, which luckily we didn't have any.
Yeah.
I've only seen reports of 2 injuries, I think, from one of the tornadoes, so that's great news. So we'll see Arthur again probably in another 6 years or so.
Yeah.
But needless to say, a very impactful system for the people that got hit by those tornadoes.
Oh. Heartbreaking.
Yeah, absolutely. And the flooding as well, which we've certainly talked about. And at least we're getting a chance to dry out now. You certainly don't want another tropical system coming up.
I think people need a break.
As saturated as we are. And you and I have been highlighting the flooding in Mississippi for a couple of weeks here. So,
I think the last few weeks we had nothing but rain. But actually, like this past weekend when I was forecasting the upcoming week, I think we all could take a sigh of relief with significant lesser rain chances.
Right. We'll get back into this in just a couple of minutes. Stay with us. All right, hello again. Chief Meteorologist Hank Allen here with Natalie Parsons back in the mix and continuing along some of the discussions on the tropical frequencies, which over the past couple of weeks, as we know, we've talked about the potential locally at least to see, or somewhere in the Gulf, to see some of those early season systems this year. And indeed we have one. We'll see if we can do another one in July. Obviously, the Gulf's still one of the hotter areas for development as you go through July. You start to look up across sort of the eastern parts of the U.S. there around the Outer Banks, extending on into the western Atlantic. See what happens there. I think the waters, we'll have to pull up sometime here over the next couple of weeks some of these water temps across the western Atlantic, because I think they're still a little cooler than average up there, and especially around New York and those spots. So I still think as we get into next month, July, probably the zone that we'll have to look at. And it's interesting because we had the MJO last week and we had talked about, not a guarantee with anything developing, but it was over us at the time that Arthur did form, and even though it wasn't overly impressive, maybe that helped to initiate things just a little bit. So we'll see how this goes as that cycle comes back around. So now we're out of it. So I wouldn't really expect anything for the next 2 or 3 weeks because we're early in the season anyway. But we'll see if anything pops up as we get back into that cycle next time around.
Oh, wow.
August will be interesting to me because, of course, we look down to the main development region down there in the Atlantic, but, that's when the El Nino starts to kick in this year.
Oh, it hasn't?
Well, the impacts, I guess I should say.
Okay, because we've already seen like the super wet in our neck of the woods.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a great point.
Yes, because I've been noticing, I'm like, El Nino is happening here.
Yeah. And I guess I should have said kicks in more. Because you're right, that'll be interesting to see through the summer here too, because obviously we've been very wet. We've talked about the flooding rains and the heavy rain over the past couple of weeks, in the past 3 to 4 weeks, I guess, really. And so there's wild stuff already going on. You've got, I think, a big heat wave in France right now. And so this El Nino thing just, starts jacking everything around a bit.
Mother Nature's just crazy.
Yeah, and so once you get into the middle of the summer, I guess I was thinking more of, we've seen those forecasts of just those super hot water temps. What was it, September, October, November, or at least August through October.
Yeah.
We showed those a couple weeks ago. So that's when it would really start to kick in, I think, in terms of impacting tropical systems. And that's when you start to look at the main development region down there. So
like last year.
Yeah, so where most of them were.
One.
Yeah. And that's why I still think, even later in the season, I still think the Gulf or the Caribbean is more likely to have a system than, way out here. Just because of, as you mentioned, we had all those waves coming off last year, turning north.
Poor Bermuda.
Didn't have the El Nino last year. And so we really don't have the waves this year. We've got the El Nino. So I still think.
Was it La Nina last year or no?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit.
Okay.
It was I think we started the season with some La Nina.
Okay.
And I think it kind of went neutral towards maybe second half of September.
Oh, so it doesn't even last all season
if
long.
memory serves. Yeah, these things can change around on you. Obviously, this El Nino is forecast to be very big, so we expect that to last. And it's interesting because usually El Nino, or at least it typically impacts winter in the south to be very wet. But I do agree that I think we're probably seeing at least some aspect of it right now.
Also in the Pacific, because I think I lost count. on how many tropical storms and stuff they've had.
Oh, they've already had quite a few.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're going to be ripping up pretty good over there with all those warm temps. September, of course, that's when the peak of the season is. Same type of scenario. You tend to get a lot of that development off to the east, which then curves to the north, which again is why a lot of times I don't concern myself with those waves. I mean, you got to watch them, but you know, I think I mentioned this a couple weeks ago. This longitude right here, we've only had a couple, maybe 6 or 7 storms. I think they've developed east of that point over the past 100 years that have gotten close to New Orleans or within like 60 miles or something like that. So most of our activity comes from either, the Western Atlantic,
or the Caribbean.
Certainly the Caribbean, certainly the Gulf, as we know, and that sort of thing. And that fits. You think about the past few years. I mean, Laura, you know, started in the Gulf. You had Delta. You had, what was it, Helene? That was kind of, even Michael started down here and then shot up here. Helene around here. And Ian. I mean, you know, a lot of these have started closer in. So those are really the ones you got to focus on, as opposed to these, you know, storms that are rolling.
Do you see a difference in living here for as long as you have? Have you seen a difference in terms of the magnitude of a hurricane or tropical storm depending on where they come out of?
That's a good question. Not necessarily, because you get, you know, massive ones. I do think that MJO plays a part. Like we had the one that moved close to Bermuda last year that shot up to Cat 5. You had the one, what was it, Melissa over Jamaica, which shot up to Cat 5.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big impact. I think you're in fair game to get those wherever, depending on where that MJO sets up. But I do think over the past few years, we have seen more develop maybe a little quicker, closer in, and that's been what a lot of people have talked about, like emergency managers and that sort of thing. They say we have less time to prepare. And Laura was certainly a great example of that. Ida was a great example. Not to say that these weren't forecast. Ida, especially to me, was very well modeled, you know, about a week out. But it's hard for people, I think, to wrap their mind around something that's a tropical storm here and then almost a Cat 5 here, you know, in like 3 or 4 days.
That's rapid growth.
Michael especially was crazy. I mean, it was down here, went to a Cat 5 in like 2.5 days coming up here. Wow. So those are the things that I think are a little bit more, we're just seeing those increase a little bit more than maybe 15 to 20 years ago. You still had the huge, big, strong storms during that time. I just think they are intensifying a little closer to the coast, a little quicker at this point. So that's why you got to be prepared. October, of course, obviously we're on the downhill slide. I think we've only got about a minute and a half left. So real quick, we'll show you the latest update on that sea surface temperature anomaly. This is what you were talking about here. Starting to see that warm air really picking up across the Pacific, which of course is going to lead to more systems, maybe a little bit farther south even in the Pacific. But it's that warm air that we'll keep an eye on. Not warm air, obviously, that's warm surface temperatures. So sea surface temperatures there, warmer than average. But it's that zone right there that is forecast to just blow up over the next couple of months in terms of how warm relative to average it is. And that is going to create that El Nino force. I mean, you can already see it. This is already starting to, what is that, Peru right there? So you're already starting to see off the coast of Peru, really starting to see some of those warmer temperatures setting up. So got about a minute left. Any final thoughts that you noticed on Arthur last week as you were watching?
Oh gosh, it was just insanity.
Yeah.
They kept you and Kerrigan on your toes the whole time.
Those tornadoes, I mean, typically you'll get a bunch of those flying off the handle in a tropical system in those bands around a strong system. What was crazy to me about that batch was, and I mentioned this off the top, it was almost more convective, like severe weather oriented, to where these rotations were just well defined on radar, and for a long time. You know, I mean, tropical system, I think the longest one, was on the North Shore from like Slidell to Burlington or something for like 12 miles. I mean, typically you don't see that with tropical hurricane, tropical tornado development where they're just up and down all the time. So hopefully things quiet down and we get a break for the next few weeks. We'll be back here next Tuesday, of course. Natalie, Parsons, Hank Allen, thanks for sticking with us on Tracking the Tropics.